Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into how one leader's aggressive choices and a whole lot of broken rules kicked off the deadliest conflict in human history. We're going to look closely at the step-by-step escalation that pushed Europe and eventually the entire world into a truly devastating war.
So you might be wondering, how exactly did one man's plans start the biggest war in history? Well, it definitely didn't happen overnight. Instead, it was more like a massive line of dominoes falling, a deliberate, calculated series of broken agreements that totally capitalized on the weaknesses and fears of other nations.
Part 1. Hitler's Big Goals. To really grasp how this all started, we first have to understand the rules of the game back then, and what Adolf Hitler actually wanted to achieve when he came to power. When he became Chancellor of Germany in 1933, his absolute #1 target was destroying the Treaty of Versailles. That's the peace settlement that ended the First World War. And it left a lot of Germans feeling incredibly angry, just completely humiliated. Under this treaty, Germany lost a ton of land. Their army was slashed to just 100,000 soldiers, and they had to pay these crippling financial reparations that absolutely tanked their economy. Hitler, along with many right-wing nationalists, absolutely despised this treaty and basically built their entire platform on tearing it up. But here's the thing. He didn't just want revenge for the past. He had a really radical vision for the future. He wanted to push Germany's borders way out to give his people Lebensraum, which translates to living space. He firmly believed that for Germany to be a true global power, it needed to expand eastward into places like Poland and the Soviet Union, just so the German people would have more land to live on and farm.
So his grand plan, his bold foreign policy aims, were actually laid out super clearly right from the jump. Destroy the Treaty of Versailles, rebuild the military, which is known as rearmament, unite all German-speaking people into one greater Germany, grab that Lebensraum in the east, and completely crush communism, which he viewed as a massive threat. Now, achieving all of this, that meant he was absolutely going to have to break some serious international rules.
Which brings us to Part 2, Breaking the Rules. Let's see how he actually put these goals into action and tipped over those first few dangerous dominoes.
He didn't just smash the rulebook all on day one. It was a slow, strategic creep. In 1933, he pulls Germany out of the League of Nations and starts secretly rebuilding the army. Then, in 1936, he takes a much bigger gamble by marching troops into the Rhineland. And by 1938, he pulls off the Anschluss, which was a union with Austria.
Let's zoom in on 1936 for a second, because it's a huge turning point. The Rhineland was this demilitarized zone, set up specifically to buffer and protect France from a potential German attack. So by sending troops in there, Hitler directly violated international treaties. But here's the crazy part. Britain and France did absolutely nothing. Britain kind of figured Germany was just walking into its own backyard, and France absolutely did not want to risk a war. That lack of pushback right there, it gave Hitler a massive boost of confidence to take even wilder risks. And he did just that. Totally emboldened, by 1938 he turns up the heat on the Austrian government. He stirs up a bunch of trouble using local Austrian Nazis, literally forces the chancellor to resign, and just sends German troops rolling right across the border. They entered Austria without facing a single shot. And once again, Britain and France just kind of watched it happen, taking zero action to stop him.
Okay, Part 3. The policy of appeasement. With all these rules being so blatantly broken, you are probably wondering why on earth the other powerful countries didn't just step in and put a stop to it.
Well, it all comes down to a strategy used by Britain and France called appeasement. Basically, this is the policy of giving in to some of Hitler's demands just to avoid another catastrophic war. It's kind of like giving a schoolyard bully your lunch money, right? You're just hoping that if you hand it over this one time, they'll finally leave you alone. We've got to remember, the sheer horror of World War I was still super fresh in everyone's minds, and countries were still clawing their way through the Great Depression. People were desperate for peace.
This policy really peaks and is brilliantly illustrated by the Munich Agreement in 1938. Hitler had his eyes on the Sudetenland. This was a region in Czechoslovakia filled with over 3 million German-speaking people and some really heavily fortified military defenses. So at a conference in Munich, Britain, France, and Italy sit down and just agree to let Germany take the territory. They didn't even invite Czechoslovakia to the meeting. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain actually came home waving a piece of paper, declaring he'd secured peace for our time, genuinely hoping this would finally satisfy Hitler's appetite.
But behind the scenes, people were totally split on this strategy. On one hand, he had leaders like Chamberlain championing appeasement. He argued that the Treaty of Versailles was too harsh anyway, that Britain desperately needed time to build up its own military, and that a world war just had to be avoided at all costs.
But on the other hand, political outliers of the time, like Winston Churchill, were sounding the alarm. He was absolutely adamant that Hitler could not be trusted, that he would just keep breaking his promises, and that every little success was only making Germany stronger and way more dangerous.
Part 4. The final domino falls. And spoiler alert, Churchill was 100% right. Appeasement was about to totally collapse.
By March 1939, Hitler rips up the Munich Agreement and marches his troops right into the rest of Czechoslovakia. Appeasement had completely failed. Britain and France finally realized he was never going to stop, so they promised to defend his next obvious target, Poland. Knowing this, Hitler pulls a move that literally shocked the globe. In August 1939, he signs a non-aggression pact with his sworn ideological enemy, Joseph Stalin. Hitler's primary aim here was purely strategic. He wanted to avoid fighting a war on two fronts against the West and the Soviets at the exact same time.
But this Nazi-Soviet pact had a huge, dark secret hidden inside it. Germany and the Soviet Union quietly agreed to just carve up Poland between them. See, Hitler desperately wanted the Polish corridor back. That was German land handed over to Poland after World War I to give them access to the sea. And with the Soviets out of his way, he felt totally unstoppable.
After that pact, the final dominoes fell in an absolute blur. Just days later, on September 1st, 1939, German troops invaded Poland. Hitler honestly genuinely believed Britain and France would just blink again, just like they did with the Rhineland, Austria, and Czechoslovakia. But he completely miscalculated. They issued an ultimatum to withdraw. When he ignored it, Britain and France officially ended appeasement and declared war on Germany on September 3rd.
When we zoom out and look at the big picture, it's clear the outbreak of this war wasn't triggered by just one single event. It was this deeply toxic mix of long-term factors. You had the lingering fury over the Treaty of Versailles, the total failure of the League of Nations to keep the peace, and that policy of appeasement which just made Britain and France look incredibly weak. All of these factors combined to create the absolute perfect environment for Hitler's wildly aggressive foreign policy to drag the world into its most devastating conflict ever. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with something to really think about. When you're dealing with someone who constantly breaks the rules and pushes every boundary, is it better to try and compromise for the sake of peace, or do you have to stand your ground early on, even if it risks a massive conflict? It's a heavy question from history, but man, it still completely resonates today. Thank you so much for joining me, and keep exploring the past.